It was a crisp Saturday morning in October, and the small coastal town of Asbury Park, New Jersey, was beginning to stir with the hum of everyday life. The air had a fresh bite to it, and the sounds of seagulls echoed along the shoreline. In one of the modest houses nestled a little further inland, Daniel, a 37-year-old technician, was already up and bustling around in the kitchen. He was the head technician at a local electronics repair shop and typically spent his weekends tinkering with gadgets or fixing the occasional broken appliance. But today he wasn't thinking about work. Today was different. It was Sophia's birthday. Sophia, his little girl, was turning 5. Daniel had planned everything down to the finest detail. The living room was decorated with balloons in shades of blue and white, just like the Frozen-themed party Sophia had dreamed of for months. He had even ordered a custom birthday cake, designed to look like an icy castle, just like Elsa's palace. The house was filled with the sweet, sugary scent of frosting as the cake sat on the table, waiting for the big moment. He glanced over at his wife, Natalie. Natalie was always so composed, so perfect in every way, managing a high-pressure job as a social media manager for a prominent fashion company. She was sitting at the kitchen counter, looking down at her phone, her face drawn and focused. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy with work. She had a demanding role, often tied to tight deadlines, but today, of all days, Daniel wished she could just let go and enjoy the celebration. "Natalie, you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice light, though he couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his chest. Natalie looked up from her phone, offering him a quick smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just checking in on a few things for work. Don't worry about me. You go ahead and enjoy the party." He nodded, but he wasn't convinced. She seemed off, distant somehow, as if her mind wasn't entirely present. She was always so vibrant, so full of energy, yet today her usually warm and bright demeanor seemed absent. Still, Daniel pushed the feeling aside. Today wasn't about them, it was about Sophia. "All right, I think the decorations are all set. The kids should be here soon," he said, hoping his upbeat tone would lift her spirits. He started laying out the snacks and arranging party favors on the table as the first few guests began arriving. Laughter and the sounds of excited chatter filled the house as Sophia's friends ran around, playing with balloons and toys. Daniel smiled, watching Sophia interact with her friends, her face glowing with happiness. But even as he smiled, a part of him couldn't ignore the strange, uneasy feeling that had settled deep in his stomach. Natalie was still glued to her phone, checking messages in between helping Sophia unwrap presents. She'd disappear for a few moments at a time, into the bedroom or out on the balcony, speaking quietly on the phone with someone he didn't recognize. He watched her for a moment, trying to brush away the discomfort that was creeping up. Maybe she was just stressed, he reasoned. Work was demanding, and the pressure of the day, organizing the party, making sure everything went smoothly, could be getting to her. But even as he tried to reassure himself, he noticed something else. A tension in the air, a silence between him and Natalie that hadn't been there before. A subtle shift in the way she carried herself. Something wasn't right. Daniel wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the growing sense that something was wrong gnawed at him. He couldn't place it, but it lingered. It was as though a shadow had fallen between them, one he couldn't shake, no matter how hard he tried to focus on the laughter of Sophia and her friends. Just then the doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. He walked to the door, feeling the weight of the unease still pressing down on him. As he opened it, a young man stood there, holding a large bouquet of deep red roses. "For Mrs. Natalie," the young man said, his voice polite but distant. Natalie, who had been standing nearby, looked up at the flowers, her eyes widening for a split second before she quickly masked her reaction. She rushed over to the door, her hand shaking slightly as she took the bouquet from the delivery man. "Thanks," she said quickly, her voice a little too sharp, too forced. She closed the door behind her, and Daniel watched as she fidgeted with the bouquet. Sophia, ever the curious little one, came rushing over. "Mom, who's the flowers from? Why are they so big?" she asked, her face lighting up with innocent excitement. Natalie forced a smile, brushing off the question as best as she could. "Oh, they're just from a friend of mine. A colleague at work," she said, her voice wavering slightly. But something about her response didn't sit right with Daniel. He had known Natalie long enough to recognize when she was hiding something. Her attempt to dismiss the flowers with a vague explanation only made him feel more uneasy. He couldn't help but glance down at the card tucked into the bouquet. The writing was elegant, a flowing script that looked out of place against the festive chaos of the party. He reached down and pulled the card free, feeling the weight of his growing suspicion settle over him. He read the words aloud, though his voice barely made it past a whisper. For the woman who has always inspired my life. I can't live without you. A. The letter A. His heart skipped a beat. The world around him seemed to slow as his mind raced. Who was A? Why had Natalie received such a personal and expensive gift? Why, of all days, had it arrived on Sophia's birthday? Daniel's breath hitched in his chest as confusion and anger bubbled to the surface. He turned to Natalie, his eyes narrowing. Who is this Natalie? He asked, his voice low and strained. Natalie froze, her face going pale as the blood drained from her cheeks. For a moment she didn't speak. Then her shoulders slumped as she met his gaze. It's Aaron, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. He's a client. Someone I've been seeing for the past 7 months. Daniel felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. The world tilted, and everything he thought he knew about his life with Natalie, his family, crumbled into dust. He couldn't speak. He just stood there, staring at her, at the flowers, at the shattered image of everything he'd believed. Why? Was all he managed to ask, the word choking him as it left his throat. But Natalie couldn't answer. There were no words left to explain what had already been broken. The air in the house felt thick, almost suffocating. The laughter of the children and the sound of the party continued in the background, but Daniel couldn't hear any of it. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, each beat sounding louder than the last. The weight of Natalie's confession hung in the air, pressing down on him, suffocating him. 7 months. 7 months of lies. 7 months of betrayal. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw tightened as he tried to process what he had just heard. It didn't make sense. Aaron. Who was this person? How could Natalie, the woman he had trusted with his life, betray him like this? How could she do this to Sophia, to their family? Sophia, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding just steps away, bounced around the living room with her friends, giggling and playing with balloons. The contrast between the innocent joy of the children and the storm raging inside Daniel was unbearable. He wanted to scream. He wanted to collapse to his knees and beg for everything to be different. But instead, he stood there, frozen, as Natalie shifted uncomfortably in front of him, unable to look him in the eye. Daniel, I didn't want to hurt you, she stammered, her voice full of desperation. I never meant for any of this to happen. It just did. It's complicated. Complicated? Daniel repeated, his voice rising slightly. His throat felt tight, the anger bubbling up inside of him. How could it be complicated, Natalie? You've been lying to me. You've been sneaking around behind my back. For 7 months you've been seeing someone else. How could you do this? I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. Please understand. I don't even know how to explain it. Aaron and I, we were just talking at first. But it turned into something more. And I didn't know how to stop it. Daniel's stomach turned. He felt sick. He wanted to tell her to stop talking, to shut up, to make the world stop spinning for just one moment so he could breathe. But he couldn't. He couldn't even find the words. His mind raced, spinning through the memories of their life together, the laughter, the love, the shared dreams, and now they all felt like lies. Every sweet moment now felt tainted by the shadow of what Natalie had done. You think this is just some misunderstanding? Daniel finally managed to ask, his voice trembling with disbelief. You think you can just explain it away and I'll be okay with it? With the fact that you've been sleeping with someone else while we've been raising our daughter together? No, I don't expect you to just forgive me, Natalie said, her voice shaky. I'm not asking you to do that. Please, Daniel. I never wanted it to get this far. I made a mistake and I don't know how to fix it. But please don't throw everything away. Daniel stepped back, his eyes flickering toward the doorway where Sophia's laughter echoed. How could he even begin to explain this to her? How could he tell his 5-year-old daughter that the world she knew was now shattered, that her family, the one she had always depended on, was breaking apart? As much as he wanted to scream at Natalie to demand more answers, he knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. Sophia deserved better. She deserved a stable home, a safe place to grow up, where she didn't have to watch her parents tear each other apart. I can't do this, Natalie, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. I can't pretend that everything is okay when I know the truth. You've ruined this family and I can't stay here anymore. I need to think. With those words, he turned away from her, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The room felt smaller, suffocating as he walked toward the door, leaving Natalie standing there, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow. Sophia was still playing in the living room, oblivious to the conversation that had just taken place, to the bombshell that had just shattered her parents' lives. Daniel could barely look at her, his heart aching with a pain so deep, it felt like his chest might split open. But he had to go. He had to clear his mind. He had to make sense of everything that had just happened. Before he left, he turned back to Natalie. She was still standing where he had left her, her hands trembling, her face a mask of guilt. "I'll figure out what to do," Daniel said quietly. "I'll find a way to get through this. But don't expect me to forgive you, not after what you've done." And with that, he walked out the door, the sound of Sophia's laughter fading into the distance as he stepped out into the cold, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The next few days felt like an endless blur of emotion for Daniel. His mind was a storm, constantly churning with anger, confusion, and hurt. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see Natalie's face, the look of guilt and regret etched into her features as she tried to explain herself. But none of it made sense. 7 months. 7 months of lies. 7 months of betrayal. Daniel barely slept. He spent his days at work, mechanically going through the motions, fixing gadgets and repairing electronics, but his mind was never truly there. The image of Natalie and Aaron, their secret, their betrayal, haunted him at every turn. He kept asking himself the same questions. How had it gone so wrong? How had he missed the signs? Had he been so blinded by love that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him? Every moment with Sophia became bittersweet. He wanted to be there for her, to shield her from the pain, but the weight of the situation hung over him like a dark cloud. How could he explain this to her? How could he tell his daughter that her mother had been unfaithful? The thought of Sophia's heartbreaking was enough to make Daniel feel as though he might crumble under the pressure. But he couldn't. He had to stay strong. For Sophia. The days passed in a fog, and as the weekend approached, Daniel knew that things couldn't stay the same. He had to make a decision. He couldn't live like this, constantly second-guessing himself, wondering if everything he had ever known was just a lie. He needed space. He needed answers. It was Saturday afternoon when it all came to a head. Daniel had been staying at a friend's house, trying to clear his mind. He had arranged to meet Natalie at the house to talk about the future. He wasn't sure what he expected from the conversation, but he knew he needed to hear it from her. He needed to understand why she had done this. As he stood in front of their house, he hesitated for a moment. The place where he had built a life with Natalie, where he had promised to love and cherish her, now felt like a distant memory. The yard, once filled with the sounds of laughter and joy, now felt cold and silent. Natalie opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, her face drawn and pale. She hadn't been sleeping well either. He could see it in her eyes, her guilt, her regret. But it didn't change what had happened. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please just listen to me. I know I've ruined everything, but I never wanted it to end like this." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "Then why, Natalie? Why did you do it? You knew it was wrong. You knew how much I trusted you." "I don't have an answer for you," she replied, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. It wasn't something I planned. It just happened. I didn't know how to stop it." Daniel clenched his fists at his sides, feeling the surge of anger rise within him again. He had heard enough. "You didn't know how to stop it?" he repeated, his voice cold. "You didn't know how to stop sleeping with someone else while we were building a life together? While we were raising Sophia?" "I never wanted to hurt you," Natalie whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. But I never stopped loving you, Daniel. I swear." The words hit Daniel like a slap to the face. How could she still say that? How could she claim she loved him when she had betrayed him so completely? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "You can't love someone and do something like that," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Love isn't just about words. It's about trust. And you've broken that trust. I can't just forget what you've done." Natalie stepped closer, reaching out for him, but Daniel took a step back. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, had never been more apparent. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right," she pleaded. "Please, Daniel. Please don't leave me. I know I messed up, but I want to fix this. I need you. We can figure this out together. For Sophia." Daniel's heart broke at the mention of their daughter's name. Sophia. She was the one thing that still held him together. He looked away, unable to meet Natalie's gaze. "I can't do this anymore, Natalie," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stay here and pretend like everything's fine when it's not. I can't trust you. Not after what you've done." The finality in his words hung in the air. Natalie's face crumpled in grief as the tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Please don't do this," she begged. "I love you. I want our family to be whole again. But Daniel knew it was too late. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. There was no going back. I can't forgive you for this, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. I just can't. As he turned to leave, he heard Natalie's sobs echoing in the distance. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't go back. He had to do what was best for Sophia. For himself. The weight of the decision settled heavily on his shoulders, but he knew it was the only choice he had left. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal meetings, and difficult conversations. Daniel didn't know what he expected. He had hoped for some kind of resolution, some kind of closure, but it all felt like a constant battle. Natalie had moved out of their house, and the space where their family had once thrived now felt cold and empty. The silence was overwhelming. Only Sophia's laughter, now tinged with sadness, could break through the stillness. Daniel focused on Sophia, pouring every ounce of his energy into making sure she felt loved and safe. He kept a routine, taking her to the park, watching cartoons together, and doing everything he could to shield her from the reality of their situation. Sophia didn't fully understand what had happened, but Daniel knew she could sense the tension. The once vibrant atmosphere in their home had shifted, and while Sophia's smile still lit up the room, there was something different about the way she looked at him now. At night, when Sophia was tucked into bed, Daniel would lie awake in the darkness, his mind racing. He thought about the life he had lost, the family he had thought would always be there. And he thought about Natalie. His heart ached for her. He didn't hate her, but he couldn't forget what she had done. He had tried, but the betrayal was too deep. The divorce proceedings were difficult, and although Natalie pleaded with him, there was no turning back. Daniel had made up his mind. He would fight for full custody of Sophia. She was the only thing that mattered now. He couldn't let Natalie, with all her confusion and regret, tear their little family apart. He had to be the stable one for Sophia. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the situation felt unbearable. He missed the life he thought he'd have, and he missed the woman he once loved. But with each passing day he began to realize something. He wasn't just surviving. He was rebuilding. Daniel had always been a man of quiet strength, but now he was discovering a new resilience within himself. Every time he held Sophia, every time she laughed at one of his silly jokes, or held his hand as they walked down the street, he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the life he had envisioned, but it was their life now, and he was determined to make it as good as possible for her. Meanwhile, Natalie was facing the consequences of her actions. After the divorce, she lost her job at the fashion company. The scandal surrounding the affair had been hard to hide, and her reputation in the industry was damaged beyond repair. She tried to reach out to Daniel, but he remained firm in his decision. There was nothing she could say to undo what had been done. She had sacrificed too much for a moment of weakness, and now she was paying the price. She spent her days in solitude, working through her own guilt and remorse. The walls of her once vibrant life felt suffocating, and the isolation was crushing. She had always thought she could have it all, but now she had nothing. The truth hit her harder than she could have ever imagined. In the quiet moments of reflection, Natalie realized how much she had taken for granted. She thought she could have both, her career, her family, the affair, and that it would all somehow work out. But now, with everything in ruins, she understood the depth of her mistake. There was no easy way to fix what she had broken. She couldn't bring back the love she had betrayed. She couldn't undo the hurt she had caused. Months passed, and slowly, Daniel found a rhythm in his new life. He became involved in a community group for single fathers, where he met others who were going through similar challenges. It helped him feel less alone. He also began to rediscover passions that had taken a back seat during his marriage: painting, hiking, and even taking up cooking as a hobby to unwind after long days. It wasn't the same, but it was enough. One evening, as Daniel was finishing up dinner with Sophia, he realized something. His life was different now. He was no longer the man who had been betrayed, no longer the husband holding on to a fading dream. He had become someone stronger. Someone who had learned to rise from the ashes. Sophia's laughter echoed through the house as she recited a new joke she had learned at school, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt at peace. This wasn't how he had imagined his life would go. But it was his life. And he was determined to make it work for Sophia. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but as he looked at his daughter's smiling face, he realized that he had everything he needed. Sophia had been his anchor, his reason for moving forward. And with her by his side, Daniel knew he could face whatever the future held. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Daniel finally felt that spark of hope he had been searching for. It wasn't the life he had planned, but in some ways it was even better. It was real. It was honest. It was theirs.